it's Aliyah. I'm going to be reading Chapter 1 of the Neverending Story. Chapter 1, Fantastica in Danger. All the beasts in Howling Forest were safe in their caves, nests, and burrows. It was midnight. The storm wind was whistling through the tops of a grey ancient trees. Their towering trunks creaked and groaned. Suddenly, a faint light came zigzagging through the woods, stopped here and there, trembling fitfully, flew up into the air, rested on a branch, and a moment later hurried on. It was a glittering spear about the size of a child's ball. It moved in long leaps, touched the ground now and then bound up again. But it wasn't a ball. It was a will-o'-the-wisp. It had lost its way, and that's something quite unusual even in Fantastica, because ordinarily will-o'-the-wisps make others lose their way. Inside this ball of the light, there was a small, exceedingly active figure, which ran and jumped with all its might. It was neither male nor female, for such distinctions don't exist among will-o'-the-wisps. In its right hand it carried a tiny white flag, which glittered behind it. That meant it was either a messenger nor a flag of the truth-bearer. You'd think it would have bumped into a tree, leaping like that in the darkness. But there was no danger of that, for will-o'-the-wisps are incredibly nimble and can change the directions in the middle of a leap. That explains the zigzagging, but in a general sort of way, it moved in a definite direction, up to the moment when it came to a jolting crag and started back in a flight. Whimpering like a puppy, it sat down on the fort of a tree and pondered a while for venturing out and cautiously looking around the crag. Up ahead it saw a clearing in the woods, and there in the light of campfires sat three figures of different sizes and shapes. A giant, who looked as if his whole of him were made of gray stone, lay stretched out on his belly. He was almost 10 feet long. Propped up on one elbow, he was looking into the fire. In his weather-beaten stone face, which seemed strangely small in comparison with his powerful shoulders, his teeth stood out like a row of steel chisel. The will-o'-the-wisp recognized him as belonging to the family of rock chewers. These were creatures who lived in a mountain range inconceivably far from Howling Forest. But they not only lived in the mountain range, they also lived on it. For little by little, they were eating it up. Rocks were their only food. Luckily, a little bit went a long way. They could live for weeks and months on a single bite of this, for them, extremely nutritious fare. There weren't very many rock chewers, and besides it was a large mountain range. But since these giants had been there a long time, they lived to a greater age than most of the inhabitants in Fantastica. Those mountains had come over the years to look very strange, like the enormous Swiss cheese full of holes and grottos, and that's why they were known as the Cheesy Whizzies. But the rock chewers not only fed on stone, they made everything they needed out of it: furniture, hats, shoes, tools, even cockadoo clocks. So it was not surprising that the vehicle of this particular giant, which was now leaning against a tree behind him, was a sort of bicycle made entirely of this material, and with two wheels that looked like enormous millstones. On the whole, it suggested a steamroller with pedals. The second figure, who was sitting to the right of the first, was a little nighthawk. No more than twice the size of the will-o'-the-wisp, he looked like a pitch-black furry caterpillar sitting up. He had little pink hands, with which he gestured violently as he spoke, and below his tousled black hair 2 big round eyes like moons, in which was presumably his face. Since there were nighthawks of all shapes and sizes in every part of Fantastica, it was hard to tell by the sight of him which this one had come from, far or near. But one can guess that he was traveling, because the unusual amount of the nighthawks, a large bat, wrapped in its wings like a closed umbrella, was hanging head down from a nearby branch. It took the will-o'-the-wisp some time to discover the third person on the left side of the fire, for he was so small as to be scarcely discernible from the distance. He was one of the tinies, a delicately built little fellow in a bright-colored suit and a top hat. The will-o'-the-wisp knew something to nothing about tinies, but it had once heard that these built whole cities in the branches of trees, and the houses were connected by stairwells, rope ladders, and ramps. But the tinies lived in an entirely different part of the boundless Fantastican empire, even further away than the rock chewers, which made it all the more amazing that the amount of which had evidently carried the tiny all this way from all things a snail. Its pink shell was surmounted by a gleaming silver saddle, and its bridle, as well as the reins fastened to the feelers, glittered like silver threads. The will-o'-the-wisp couldn't get over it that three such different creatures should be sitting there so peacefully, for harmony between different species was by no means the rule in Fantastica. Battles and wars were frequent, and certain of the species had been known to feud for hundreds of years. Moreover, not all the inhabitants of Fantastica were good and honorable. There were also thieving, wicked, and cruel ones. The will-o'-the-wisp itself belonged to a family that hardly reputable for truthfulness and reliability. After observing the scene and the fair fight of some time, the will-o'-the-wisp noticed that each of the three had something white, either a flag or a white scarf worn across his chest, which meant that they were messengers or flag of truth bearers, and that of course accounted for the peaceful atmosphere. Could they be traveling on the same business as the will-o'-the-wisp? What they were saying couldn't be heard from a distance because of the howling winds in the treetops. But since they respected one another as messengers, might they recognize the will-o'-the-wisp in the same capacity and refrain from harming it? It had to act someone the way, and there seemed like likelihood of finding a better opportunity at this hour in the middle of the woods. So plucking up the courage, it ventured out of its hiding place and hovered trembling in mid-air waving its white flag. The rock-chewer, whose face was turned in the direction, was first to notice the will-o'-the-wisp. Lots of traffic around here, he crackled. Here comes another one. Ooh, it's a will-o'-the-wisp, whispered the nighthawk, and his moon eyes glowed. Pleased to meet you. The tiny stood up, took a few steps towards the newcomer, and chirped. Ooh, it's a will-o'-the-wisp, whispered the nighthawk, and his moon eyes glowed. Pleased to meet you. The tiny stood up, took a few steps towards the newcomer, and chirped. If my eyes don't see me, you're here as a messenger. Yes, indeed, said the will-o'-the-wisp. The tiny removed his red top hat, made a slight bow, and tweeted, Oh, do join us. We too are messengers. Won't you be seated? And with his hat, he motioned towards an empty place by the fire. Many thanks, said the will-o'-the-wisp, coming timidly closer. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Blurb. Delighted, said the tiny. My name is Glukuk. The nighthawk bowed without getting up. My name is Vushvazul. And mine, the rock-chewer cracked, is Pi Krazark. All three looked at the will-o'-the-wisp, who were wiggling with embarrassment. Will-o'-the-wisp find it most unpleasant to be looked full in the face. Won't you sit down, dear Blurb? Said the tiny. To the truth, said the will-o'-the-wisp, I am in a terrible hurry. I only wanted to ask if by chance you knew the way to the Ivory Tower. Ooh, said the nighthawk. Could you be going to see the childlike empress? Exactly, said the will-o'-the-wisp. I have an important message for her. What does it say? The rock-chewer crackled. But you see, said the will-o'-wisp, shifting his weight from foot to foot, it's a secret message. All three of us, who have the same mission as well, replied the Vaswuzum, the nighthawk. That makes us partners. Maybe we even have the same message, said Gluck, the tiny. Sit down and tell us, Crackle. The will-o'-the-wisp sat down in a tiny place. My home, it began after a moment's hesitation, is a long way from here. I don't know if any of those presents have heard of it. It's called Moldermore. Whoo! Cried the nighthawk delightedly. A lovely country. The will-o'-the-wisp smiled faintly. Yes, isn't it? Is that all you have to say, love? Crackle. What is the purpose of your trip? Something has happened in Mortarport, said the will-o'-the-wisp, haughtily. Something impossible to understand. And actually, it's something happening, and it's still happening. It's hard to describe. The way it began was, well, in the east of our country, there's a lake, and that's it. And there was a Lake Farmingbroth, we called it. Well, the way it began was like this. One day, Lake Farmingbroth wasn't there anymore. It was gone. See? You mean it dried up? Luke inquired. No, said the will-o'-the-wisp. There'd be a dry up lake, but there wasn't. Where the lake used to be, there was nothing, absolutely nothing. Now do you see? A hole? The rock-chewer grunted. No, not a hole, said the will-o'-the-wisp despairingly. A hole, after all, is something. This is nothing at all. The three other messengers exchanged glances. What who does nothing look like? Asked the nighthawk. That's just what's so hard to describe, said the will-o'-the-wisp unhappily. It doesn't look like anything. It's like there's no word for it. Maybe the tiny suggested. When you look at the place, it's as if you were blind. The will-o'-the-wisp stared open mouthed. Exactly, it cried. But where? I mean how? You had the same? Wait a minute, the rock chore crackled. Was it only this one place? At first, yeah, the will-o'-the-wisp explained. That is, the place got bigger little by little, and then all of a sudden, Flogger, the father of the frogs who lived in Lake Farming Broth with his family, was gone too. Some of the inhabitants started running away, but little by little, the same thing happened to the other parts of Malmar. It usually started with just a little chunk, no bigger than a partridge egg. But then these little chunks got bigger and bigger. If someone put his foot into one of them by mistake, the foot or hand or whatever else he put in would be gone too. It didn't hurt, it was just a part of whoever it would be missing. Some would even fall in on purpose if they got too close to nothing. It has an irresistible attraction. The bigger the place, the stronger the pull. None of us could imagine what this terrible thing might be, what caused it, and what we could do about it. And seeing that it didn't go away by itself but kept spreading, we finally decided to send a messenger to the childlike empress to ask her for advice and help. Well, I'm the messenger. The three others glazed silently in space. After a while, the nighthawk sighed. Whoo! It's the same where I come from, and I'm traveling on the exact same errand. Hoo hoo! The tiny turned to the will-o'-the-wisp. Each one of us, he chirped, comes from a different province of Fantastica. We've met here entirely by chance, but each one of us is going to the childlike empress with the same message. And the message, granted the rock chewer, is that all Fantastica is in danger? The will-o'-the-wisp cast a terror look at each one in turn. If that's the case, he cried, jumping up, we haven't a moment to lose. We're just going to start, said the tiny. We only stopped to rest because it's so awfully dark here in Howling Forest. But now that you're joined us, Blub, you can light the way. Impossible, said the will-o'-the-wisp. Will you expect me to wait for someone who rides a snail? Sorry. But it's a racing snail, said the tiny, somewhat muff. Otherwise, the nighthawk sighed, we won't tell you which way to go. Who are you people talking to? The night chewer crackled. And sure enough, the will-o'-the-wisp hadn't even heard the other messenger's last words, for he had already flitted through the forest in long leaps. Oh well, said the tiny, pushing his top hat onto the back of his head. Maybe it wouldn't have been such a good idea to follow a will-o'-the-wisp. To tell the truth, said the nighthawk, I prefer to travel on my own, because I, for one, fly. With a quick hoo-hoo, he ordered his bag to make ready, and whisk flew he away. The rock chewer put on the campfire with the palm of his hand. I too prefer to go by myself, he crackled in the darkness. Then I don't need to worry about squashing some wee creature. Rattling and grinding, he rolls his stone bicycle straight into the woods, now and then thumping into a tree giant. Slowly the crackle receded in the distance. Gluck, the tiny, was last to set out. He seized the silvery reins and said, all right, we'll see who gets there first. Giddy up, old Tom, giddy up. And he clicked his tongue. And then there was nothing to be heard but the storm wind howling in the treetops. The clock in the belfry struck 9. Reluctantly, Bastien's thoughts turned back to reality. He was glad the Neverending Story had nothing to do with that. He didn't like books which dull, cracky writers describe hermit events and very hermit lives of hermit people. Reality gave him enough of that kind of thing. Why should he read about it? Besides, he couldn't stand it when a writer tried to convince him of something. And these humdrum books, it seemed to him, were always trying to do just that. Bastien liked books that were exciting or funny or made him dream. Books were made up, characters had marvelous adventures, books that made him imagine all sorts of things. Because one thing he was good at, possibly the only thing, was imagining things so clearly that he almost saw and heard them. When he told himself stories, he sometimes forgot everything around him and woke, as though from a dream, only when the story was finished. And this book was just like his own stories. In reading it, he heard not only the cracking of his big trees and the howling of the wind in the treetops, but also the different voices of the four comical messengers. And he almost seemed to catch the smell of moss and forest earth. Dawn in the classrooms they were starting in with Down in the classrooms they were starting on a nature study. That consisted almost entirely in counting pistols and steams. Bastien was glad to be up here in his hiding place, where he could read. This, he thought, was the right book for him. A week later, Woozbazoo, the night hawk, arrived at his destination. He was the first, or rather he thought he was first, because he was riding through the air. Just as the setting sun turned the clouds to liquid gold, he noticed that his bat was circling over the labyrinth. That was the name of an enormous garden, extending from horizon to horizon and filled with the most bewitching scents and dreamlike colors. Broad avenues and narrow paths twined their way among courts, lawns and beds of the rarest, strangest flowers in a design so artful and intricate that the whole plain resembled an enormous maze. Of course, it had been designed only for pleasure and amusement, with no intention of endangering anyone, much less of warning off an enemy. It would have been useless for such purposes, and the childlike empress required no such protection, because in all the unbound reaches of Fantastica, there was no one who would have thought of attacking her, for that there was no reason, as we shall soon see. While gliding silently over the flowery maze, the night hawk sighted all sorts of animals. In a small clearing between lilacs and lyrebirds, a group of young unicorns were playing in the evening sun, and once glaring under a giant blue bell, he even thought he saw the famous phoenix in its nest, but he wasn't quite certain, and such was his haste that he didn't want to turn back to make sure. For at the center of the labyrinth there now appeared, shimmering in fairy whiteness, the ivory tower, the heart of Fantastica and the residence of the childlike princess. The word tower might give someone who has never seen it the wrong idea. It had nothing of the church or castle about it. The ivory tower was as big as a whole city. For a distance it looked like a pointed mountain peak, twisted like a snail shell. Its highest point was deep in its clouds. Only on coming closer could you notice that the great sugar loaf consists of innumerable towers, trunks, domes, roofs, orals, trends, arches, stairwells, and balustrades, all marvelously fitted together. The whole was made of the whitest fantastic ivory, so delicately carved in every detail that it might have been taken for the lattice work of the finest lace. These buildings housed the childlike court, her chamberlains and maid-servants, wise women, astrologers, magicians, jesters, messengers, cooks, acrobats, her tightrope walkers, and storytellers, heralds, gardeners, watchmen, tailors, shoemakers, and alchemists. And all at the very summit of the great tower lived the childlike empress in a pavilion, shaped like a magnolia blossom. On certain nights, when the full moon shone most glorious in the starry night, the ivory petals opened wide, and the childlike princess would be sitting in the middle of the glorious flower. Riding on his back, the little night hawk landed on one of the lower chances, where the stables were located. Someone must have announced his arrival, for 5 imperial grooms were there waiting for him. They helped him out of the saddle, bowed to him, and headed out to the ceremonial welcome cup. As etiquette demanded, Vazbuzun took only a sip and then returned the cup. Each of the grooms took a sip, then they bowed again and led the bag to the stables. As this was done in silence, on reaching its appointed place, the bag touched neither food nor drink, but immediately rolled up, hung itself head down on a hook, and flew into a deep sleep. The little night hawk had demanded a bit too much of his mount. The grooms left it alone and kept away from the stable on tiptoes. In this stable there were many other mounts, 2 elephants, 1 pink, 1 blue, a gigantic griffin with the forequarters of an eagle and the hindquarters of a lion, a winged horse whose name was once known even outside of Fantastica, but is now forgotten, several flying dolls, a few other bats, and several dragonflies and butterflies for especially small riders. In other stables there were still other mounts, which didn't fly but ran, crawled, hopped, or swam, and each had a groom of its own to feed and take care of. Ordinarily, one would have expected to hear quite a quarterpary of different voices, roaring, screeching, piping, chirping, croaking, and chattering. But but that day there was utter silence. The little night hawk was still standing where the grooms had left him. Suddenly, without knowing why, he felt dejected and discouraged. He too was exhausted after a long trip, and not even the knowledge that he had arrived first could cheer him up. Suddenly he heard a chipper voice. "Hello, hello! If it isn't my good friend Vazul! So glad you finally made it." The night hawk looked around, and flared with his moon eyes flared with amazement, for on a blasture, leaning negligently against a flower pot, stood Luke, the tiny tipping his red the tiny tipping his red top hat. "Hoo hoo!" went the bewildered nighthawk, and again "hoo hoo!" He just couldn't think of anything better to say. The other two hadn't arrived yet. "I've been here since yesterday morning." "How, hoo hoo? How did you do it?" "Simple," said the tiny with a rather condescending smile. "Didn't I tell you I had the races now?" The nighthawk snatched his tangled black head fur within his little pink head. "I must go to the childlike empress at once," he said mournfully. The tiny gave him a pensive look. He said. "I put in for an appointment yesterday." "Put in for an appointment?" asked the nighthawk. "Can't we just go in and see her?" "I'm afraid not," chirped the tiny. "We have a long wait. You can imagine how many messages have turned up." "Hoo hoo!" the nighthawk sighed. "How come?" "You better take a look for yourself," the tiny twittered. "Come with me, my dear Vazul. Come with me." The two of them started out. The high street, which wound around the ivory tower in a narrowing spiral, was clogged with a dense crowd of the strangest creatures, enormous protuberant things, tiny cahobs, three-headed trolls, billiard doors, glittering fairies, gold-like fawns, dixies with a wavy golden hair, sparkling snow sprites, and countless others were milling about, standing in groups, or sitting silently on the ground, discussing the situation or gazing lovely in the distance. Vavasu stood still when he saw them. "Hoo hoo," he said. "What's going on? What are all they doing here?" "They're all messengers," Gluck explained. "Messengers from all over Fantastica. All with the same message as ours. I've spoken with several of them. The same menace seems to have broken out everywhere." The nighthawk went to look to a long wheezing sigh. "Do they know," he asked, "what it is, where it comes from?" "I'm afraid not. Nobody knows." "What about the childlike princess?" "The childlike princess," said the tiny in the undertone, "is ill, very ill. Maybe that's the cause of the mysterious calamity that's threatening all of Fantastica." But so far none of the many doctors who have been conferring in the Magnolia Pavilion has discovered the nature of her illness or found a cure for it. "That," said the nighthawk breathlessly, "is hoo-hoo terrible." "So it is," said the tiny. In view of the circumstances, Vavasu decided not to put in for an appointment. 2 days later, Blub, the will-o'-the-wisp, arrived. Of course it had hopped in the wrong direction and made an enormous detour. And finally, 3 days after that, Farazark, the rock chewer, appeared. He came blogging along on foot, for in a sudden frenzy of hungover he had eaten his stone bicycle. During the long waiting period, the four so unlike messengers became good friends. From then on they stayed together. But that's another story and shall be told another time.